translation from Swahili into Kinyaturu with the help of committees working on songs and liturgies. And he was called a mjengaji, not more than he was called a mchungaji. Mjengaji is a builder, and a mchungaji is a shepherd or a pastor. There were many ways to volunteer as his wife. One of the big things I was able to do was to take over all the treasury books. Our Board of World Missions required that we submit detailed reports with receipts for all the expenditures in the budget that they had allocated to us year by year. And these reports, together with all the receipts, had to be audited by other missionaries from another station. And if any errors were found, they would be corrected before they would be sent to the board treasurer in Minneapolis. So I learned the double entry method of bookkeeping. And I was on all kinds of auditing committees for other stations. The auditing involved getting together because we had to have people from another station. And that involved good camaraderie with our fellow missionaries that were down there. I have a picture of 5 pastors lined up with 5 new motorcycles, which they used to travel then in the outreach to the villages that they served. At that time, Howard had gotten his new motorcycle too, but he couldn't join the group traveling for a weekend at the lake because he had malaria. And we all know malaria can be fatal. My little brother, Mark, died of malaria back in 1927. Well, besides keeping books, what did I do? And auditing. I had women's classes that I enjoyed so much, getting the women who belonged to our congregation and anyone who wanted to join us for a short Bible study and Bible story time with pictures if I had them. And we talked about the life of Jesus and how he came to save everybody of any color, race, or gender, and how he loved all of us equally. Then after the Bible story, we'd get busy with our sewing. We cut out from patterns. We cut out little children's dresses and shirts and little elastic-waisted panties and slacks. It was wonderful to be able to use sewing to get to know some of these women, and they were wonderful people. They had a lot of humor and laughter going back and forth between them. I wish so I could understand some of the things they were saying because they used the native tongue of Kinyaturu. And that language barrier was always there for me. Even as a child, we didn't have access to groups that spoke English until we got together with our fellow missionaries in conferences or committee meetings. Howard was on the site committee to choose a new seminary for this Holy Lutheran Church of Tanganyika, because the site that had been used was way off on the peripheral edge of the church in the Usambara Mountains, and they decided they wanted it more centrally located. So the site committee, which included Howard, met in Arusha and studied the area around that, where they could find a suitable place. And sure enough, they found it at Makumira, which had been a coffee estate back in the colonial days, but had been purchased by the church to be the site for the new seminary. And we ended up years later being called to teach at that seminary. I'll talk about that later. Besides teaching them to sew by hand, backstitching hems, backstitching seams and turning up hems, I tried to teach them how to darn socks, because their husbands' socks would get holes in them, and with a little darning they could be made to last a long time. So we'd insert a used up light bulb inside and take a needle and some thicker thread and weave the pattern back and forth to fill up that hole. I never dreamed I'd be teaching somebody how to darn socks, but that's one of the things we ended up doing. I wasn't proficient enough to handle all the different things we would like to have taught them, because I needed to learn them myself first. I never did learn much about crocheting except the backstitch and embroidery. But I could cut out a little shirt and I could cut out a little dress. And the mothers said, we want to make little hats, caps with a tie under the chin to keep the visor to keep the sun off their faces. So I had to look up to get a pattern for that. We shared help from other women facing the same situation I was. So in addition to being hostess to travelers and committees, making up beds for people that were coming for this committee meeting or that, and supervising the kitchen where the wood stove smoked terribly. The smoke just came down the chimney and swept into the kitchen and made us all smoky, until it was discovered that the chimney on the rooftop was too short. They had to lengthen it so it was higher than the ridge of the roof. And when they lengthened the chimney, all that problem of smoke went away, and we could cook more comfortably in our kitchen. But I tell you, it was something to learn something about that wood stove, and I'm so glad that our helper knew more about how to do that than I did, and he taught me in case he wouldn't be around or would have days off. He came from Iramba, so he was a long way from home too, especially if you go on foot. Well, then I ended up homeschooling Howie Joe when he got to be about 4 years old. On furlough, I had picked up some kindergarten books from, what's that company that sells homeschooling? My memory's got holes in it. Anyway, books that would help me to teach Howie a little bit about kindergarten. Well, the favorite subject he had all the time was recess. Come on, Mom, it's recess time. And we'd go outside, just the two of us, and kick balls back and forth and go play hide and seek one by one. His turn had to come first, and then mine, back and forth. It was fun. I remember a little book on volcanoes. We studied volcanoes for quite a while because he was fascinated by that. It was a joy, but one I was not very fit for because I never took education courses. Howie had a rough time in his first grade, because I taught him the first part of it with some more books I had bought. And then we pulled up roots and went to the States, and he was with Grandma and Grandpa Olson over Christmas and New Year's. And in January we moved to Minneapolis from Holden City, Minnesota. And in Minneapolis he entered the first grade as a midterm. And the teacher had 42 members in that class, so was unable to give Howie much individual attention. He struggled through the rest of that first grade without having much joy in it. Then we pulled him out of roots again, uprooted him again to go to Hartford, Connecticut, where the mission board had given us a year of schooling to study world missions at the School of Missions of the Hartford Seminary Foundation. That was a real treat for me to be able to be back in class again. and learn, keep learning.
When was this, Mom?
This was 52 to 53.
Mm-hmm.
And Howie went into second grade. I wanted him to repeat first grade because I felt that we'd been so chopped up by different moves and adjustments to such big changes in his life. But the second grade teacher said, I've seen that he's got the ability to do it, and I have a small class of 26. I can spend time with him extra. Let's pull him through this second grade. You'll enjoy it. And he's a rather tall boy for his age, so don't put him back another in the first grade. But as it was, he continued then as always being the youngest in the class, just because he was a little bit tall. Well, he had a wonderful second year anyway. He just loved his teacher. And I remember when we invited her home for lunch one day on a school day. And all the way from the school to the house, he kept dancing circles around her as they walked. It was really funny to watch him coming in with his teacher, pulling her by the hand and wanting her to come into his house. He was very fond of her, and I thank her. Well, then for third grade, we were back in Africa again, 1953. And I uprooted him again to go off to boarding school at the tender age of 7 for third grade, the youngest in his class again. He told me later he would sometimes fall asleep with a pillow over his head so nobody would hear or see him, and he'd just cry his eyes out. But then he did love to be with his classmates. They had more fun together than they would have had at home alone, because children at that age need peer group. And so friendships were established that have lasted to this day. Now, when the time came after we had gotten this call to the seminary had been built at Macomita now, and we were invited to come into, again, moving into a house that nobody had lived in yet. It was brand new. It too had a wood stove, but we